So this deck in Pergola is pretty complicated. I'm going to simplify it as best as possible. We're going to show you how to use just simple tools. You don't need anything fancy. I'll show you how to get all the posts in line, how to get the deck nice and square. I'll show you how to do math on how to figure out how to get the rafters equally spaced. And I think there's a ton of tricks in here. It's all the information you need to build it yourself. If it's a little complicated or over top of your head, or maybe not what you're actually building for yourself, I do have a deck video where it's just a simple rectangular deck, and I show you everything on how to build that and square it up as well, get it level. And we also have a freestanding pergola that we built just recently, and we'll show you how to do that as well. And each video shows you different ways to square things, so that overall, if one video might have one way you like, another video might have something you don't like, but I always try to show you different ways to figure out the same thing. So, you know, watch the video. We started off right at the bare ground, and yeah, thanks for tuning in. This is a more complicated deck. It's going to be awesome. There's going to be jammed full of information. It is literally going to be everything you need to know to do this properly. It's not just one of those like, oh, it looks super cool, but how do you build it? We're going to show you everything. So today we have our pilings for all of our posts. We need to determine, we need to keep those all in line. We need to keep them square with each other. We're not going to worry about height right now because we're just going to put full height posts on, and then we'll cut them off and square them up later. Probably, I'm just going to go on the fly here. This first post, I need to probably land basically in between this light and this plug-in. I'm just going to take a quick measurement from this J trim. Oh, I guess I'm 9 3/4 from the inside. Almost 10 inches. I'm going to shoot for about 17 inches. So I'll be 2 inches off the edge of this. I don't want to make any marks on the siding. Maybe I will. Just a tiny little mark, the tiniest you've ever seen. Then I'm just going to plumb down. Now remember, I'm doing all this on the fly. This isn't no fancy video. You get to see Kody think, and think a lot. Just going to use the square, and I'm going to make a mark on the parging here. The parging is going to be, won't be perfect. I'm just going to get it close. Might just do a faint little line there, because I need to redo this deck ledger. I need to lower it. I want to be able to put a full 2x6 deck board. So I need a full 1.5 inches here, and then my deck ledger. So I'll run through that really quick today. I have that stuff in the other video, the simple deck video, but I will show you how to do it, drip cap and stuff, just really quick. But yeah, I need to continue that line up so I know where to end this deck ledger. I didn't have a level short enough, so I'll just do the old trick again and just square that off the building. Get my little peanut head in there, make that mark. I'll just cut that off, and then I can just line up my marks and make the final line. Ditch the stairs, made my mark. Now we're gonna figure out, we're gonna basically make this deck square to the house. I'll show you how to do that. This is my third way of doing stuff. I'm gonna grab my 2x2. And once I get this pinned and square, everything is referenced from this and the house. Now I'll get to the math and how and what we're doing. I'm using a 2x4 just so that I can measure, I can put my tape into it. I could also do it with a string line, but then I gotta be careful. I gotta make sure I'm not pushing on the string and all that. So this is just a little quicker for me today. Basically wanna set the edge of my board right on this line, and I'm gonna stake it in and maybe even just tack it with a screw because I don't want it moving. I've never actually done this method before, but I know it'll work. I want it fairly close to the building because I can pivot this 2x4 till I match my square. I'm already noticing something a little funky, but we're gonna deal with it as we go here. And remember, if you have an obstruction in the way, you could just use this as a reference line. This could be 5 feet over, could be 10 feet over, doesn't matter. You just know you have a square corner and then everything's laid out from there. So this doesn't have to be on the edge of your deck. It could just be there as a reference point. That's just if you have obstructions. Yeah, so just got to be careful not to ramrod that around. We have our pencil mark there. I should probably get my whiteboard. We're going to do the 3, 4, 5 method today. Keep it simple. 3, 4, 5 method. Here's the house. Here's our 2x4. We don't want this inside corner to move. It has to be stationary. I'll show you that when we lay it out. Now, the premise behind all this, 3, 4, 5. So let's say we're gonna go, this side is gonna be an increment of 3. This will be an increment of 4. And whatever our hypotenuse, this is gonna create a right angle triangle. And this is our 5 increment. So how I do that, if you go 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, that will work. 30, 40, 50 will work. What I like to do, I'm going to times each of these by 3. Times 3, times 3. 3 times 3 is 9, 12. 5 times 3 is 15. So this increment is 9, 12, 15. And that's how we're going to do it. So the end of my tape is essentially on that pencil mark. It's butted into my 2x4. It's flush with that pencil mark. I'm going to make a 12 mark, 12 feet. And I'm going to circle that, 12 feet. Then I'm going to go this way. Now this, technically we're going to be a little bit off because we have parging there and not parging there. Don't hook it on the 2x4, push it into the concrete. If you really wanted to, you could probably try to chip that off and get to the foundation itself. We're going to mark 9 feet on this 2x, and we're going to circle that one. Then I can manipulate this back and forth until the dimension from that mark to this is exactly 15. And once this measurement is 15, this board is in line, and then I pin it so it won't move. So my helper Gio's out getting us some nicer looking 6x6s, so I had to get cameraman Trav to help me. But basically I just snag the corner of my tape right on that mark and get one guy to hold it there. We pull that over. So when Travis is holding it tight on the other end, I move the 2x4 back and forth until the 15 intersects with that pencil mark. And then it's set. What I'll do, I made a little pencil mark here on the piling, just so I know when I'm pounding my pins, if it moves or not, and then obviously you always got to double check it. I'm going to double check that dimension, make sure we're on 15. If I need to, I can just bump that stake one way or the other, and I'll pin it with another one to set it solid. And then now I have my benchmark measuring. Need my jet fuel. All right, I wanted to show you guys how to do it properly. My OCD got the best of me. I chipped out the parging a bit there, gained about 3/8. That is gonna make a difference. When we were double checking, I noticed that this 2x4 moved. So I'm just gonna pin it this way. Because when I set this pin, it shifted just slightly when I double checked all of my dimensions. So that should hold it better. I need to move a few things now. Just need my cameraman. I just made a slight adjustment. We'll remeasure this. Fortunately, we can't shoot it. Sorry about that. You can see the couple adjustments that we made, changed it substantially. Even though we are only 3/16 out of square, this is how much of a gap it is over 14 feet this dimension. Just wanted to show you that. I pinned the screw there in the end. And then I'll pound this pin, I'll stake it, I'll remeasure just to be super safe. When you're watching these videos, I try to do a different squaring method in each one of them. That way, if you don't like this one, or even if you have your own way of doing it, do it your own way. If something works good for you, just do it. I'm just trying to show you how to use the math. And the other videos have different methods, just so that if you're watching them all, you can figure out which one works best for you. So amongst all the shifting, always double, triple check. Because this 2x4 moved, our first mark was different from our second. So my new mark, scratch out the first. Now I'm squaring to that. So you just got to be cognizant of that. The other thing I'm going to do, I made a mark on my piling, my new mark, and I'm just going to set a pin. I can keep an eye, make sure it's not moving. I just want to be careful if somebody kicks this or hits with the sawhorse and knocks it out of place. I just want a little extra protection here. Now that we're set square, I want to figure out this first row. They'll be parallel with the house, but I want to make sure I'm not going to get in the way of my eaves trough. So all I'm going to do, and I want to show you guys how to do things with just some simple tools. You don't need a 10-foot level to do that. You just use a 2x and your regular level. Pretty close there, and that just allows me to know my dimension from my foundation. So I know that if I was 28 3/4, I'd be touching. Now the piling shows it will be off a few inches, but I just know that 28 3/4 is bare minimum. So I obviously want to be more than that. I just wanted to verify. I don't want to just wildly guess. These pilings kind of ended up all over the place. Not bad. Just trying to figure out what dimension to go with. It'll sit nicely in all of these. Gonna mark that. Because this first piling's sitting in so much, I'll kind of base all my dimensions off of it. See, if I go 36.5, I'm on the edge of the pile. So that takes me to 30.5 because I'm using a 6x6, so I'll be 1 3/4 from the eaves trough. I think I'm going to go 37. I'm going to just overhang this a little bit, so I'll go from 31 inches to 37. So I'll just mark 31 on the piling. X there. 31, 31. Good thing the parging's missing there. Super handy trick if you have one of those big heavy chalk lines, you can actually just chalk one way through the other. But you need a nice big heavy one that you can just chalk it perfect. Next thing we got to determine is the overall length of the deck. Probably, I got to put a little thought into this. Probably just gonna have it so my last rim joist just butts up into this siding, right up to this corner. So literally, I'm just gonna end it, if you can see, right against this. So my deck ledger will go bang right there. I can put a concealed hanger on the end, and then my last rim joist hangs there. So to get that dimension, and if your helper's not around like he is in this scenario, you can just transfer this mark up to somewhere stationary. I'm going to do it against the rim joist. I can set a nail and just measure it by myself. So you want the one edge of the nail on your mark, because that's where you're going to hook your tape from. Then you can just measure by yourself, hook your tape. $183.5. Now I also got to think about my posts a little bit more. I'll tell you what I'm thinking about. $183.5 is total. let's make some more drawings. I like to draw things out so I don't get confused. You guys probably starting to learn that by now. Here's the house, it's the black line. The blue line is that corner piece of siding. And remember, our rim joist is basically right at the very edge of the foundation. So our ledger is at 183.5. Right to the end. But what I want to do is my first post is here. I'll just randomly make this other one, I don't know. Now this post has to line up there, but I have a few details that I want to show you. Now this gets down to where you start to deck. You're going to put your deck boards down. Customer, my friend Andrew, wants to picture frame it. So I'm just going to draw this. I'm actually going to put a block of wood here and then my last rim joist. So this dimension from the end of this post to the end of the deck is going to be 3 inches. I want 3 inches on the outside of some of my posts. So then, from the outside of this post, 180.5. So from our 2x4 on the ground to this post is 180.5. And then the middle one, we'll see where that ends up. I almost forgot. Same thing here. We're going to add a block. I might have to rethink that a little bit. And then my rim, my last one there. Now I'll show you real quick. The reason I can't manipulate my post, the post has to sit here, in between the receptacle and the light above. Then when I'm down here, my 3 inches can protrude this way because it won't actually interrupt the plug. So that's why we're doing it that way. I'm just going to make my adjustments, and I'm going to just change the dimensions on my board right now. I'm going to take my deck ledger an additional 1.5 inches. So what I'll do is I'll change that dimension on my board. So I'm just going to add 1.5 inches. So this, now this is just the ledger. So my ledger is going to be 185. And I know, because I went off the 2x4 over here, that I can just, once I rip this old ledger off, I can just go from that 2x4, 185. So maybe I'll go ledger equals 185. We're not going to confuse that. We're going to keep our dimensions 180.5 from outside of post to outside of post. So hopefully I'm not confusing you, but that's why you've got to make drawings. We chalked this line through because the string line is always more accurate. We had a small discrepancy in the center pile. That could be a bow in the house, could be a lot of different things. But we're just going to go off of chalk lines. Now remember, this 2x4 we placed here is the edge of our first set of posts. See, and that's why I did that 2x4, so I could easily just measure this. 180.5 is the outside of this post. That is not going to change. I'll put my square on this chalk line. There's my post location there. I'll measure 180.5 again for this one. Hope we hit it. Gio, do you want to make sure I'm butted into that 2x4? That 2x twice? apprentice Giovanni.
Hello.
180.5. I'll just circle that so I can see it later. Next step is to figure out, we're just gonna go parallel off our first line. Gio, just get a rough dimension from that chalk line, maybe to the center of that piling. And I'll do the same over here. Doesn't have to be perfect. We just wanna see roughly how close we are. I'm about 66.5. What are you roughly? 66?
65.5 maybe.
Okay.
Even.
Okay. What we're gonna do, okay, Gio, hold me on that.
I'm gonna cut an inch.
You're gonna go at an inch?
Yeah.
So Gio's on an inch. So I'm gonna say 67 is center minus 3. 1, 2, 3. So when Gio is holding me on the 1, we're 64. We're gonna go to the far end. Go a little more your way, Gio, towards you. Yeah. You're there on the 1?
Yeah.
$64. Okay. We're gonna try to chalk that. Still a couple more things to figure out. Because we have the L shape cut out of the deck, first I'm gonna figure out the total length. So what I'm gonna do is just roughly, Gio's gonna hold me into the foundation. I want my post basically, yeah, let's see here. I'm gonna go about 164 to the outside. But what we'll do, the most accurate way to treat this is we're gonna hold down the 9-foot mark, because remember I got my parging. Hold me there, Gio, right on the 9. 9 feet. 164. It's the outside of our post. Post sits like that. We're gonna go to the other end. Now hold me right somewhere where there's no, last time when yeah, right there is where there's no parging. Right down low, yeah. Because then that's 31. $164. Post sits there. So now we're gonna chalk that through. I'm gonna hold it up on this 2x twice. You good? Yeah. And nice. Bang. We're also gonna mark our 180.5. Okay. Now we just need to figure out the width of this. Okay. Now remember, my deck boards are going to be 3 inches past. Gio, do you want to hold me? Not hold me, but hold me on 3 inches.
Like,
Post is going to sit here. So what's nice about this is that my post, I'll be less than a 5-foot stair. That way if I buy 10-foot material, I can get 2 pieces out of one chunk of 10. Let's pick a dimension. So now, you're gonna be roughly there. Butt me into the 2x so we don't get confused. 54. Yeah, so we're gonna go 54. Post there. 54 over here. You might have to go 55. We're gonna go 55. So let's scratch this one out. We'll go 55, Gio. Now we get to do some brackies. Last post works out perfectly to center, which is 90 1/4. So I'm just going to go 90 1/4 minus 3. 1, 2, 3. So 87 1/4. 1, 2, 3, 93 1/4. Here's the bracket we're going to use. We're going to drill with our hammer drill, and we're just going to drill a 3/4 inch hole. We got to find center so we have the proper placement. That'll just take a sec to figure out. We also got to, these are made for 2x6 posts, so 5.5 by 5.5. And when I'm landing a full 6x6, one side I'm going to have to kind of dado out, and you'll see when we do it. So I got to just figure out if I'm putting them this way or this way. I won't bore you with those details. Now, if you're doing this at home and you don't, well, you're going to need some form of hammer drill no matter which way you do it. If you don't have the big bit, you could cut this off. You could pre-drill 4 holes, and then you could use you could use concrete screws, Tapcons. GRK makes some good concrete screws. At least you don't need bigger equipment. So keep that in mind. Today, since we have the tools, we're just going to hammer some holes in. Okay, so this is a good tip for you guys and for apprentices. I made my crosshairs a bit bigger. That way when he's drilling, if he goes off kilter, he can kind of try to correct to the center mark where he's drilling. He's even got earplugs in. What a good man. Good old Geo, he ripped the deck ledger off for us. Little story there. We built a house for these people and the one guy ended up calling him handsome little bastard. So that's his nickname. Hey Geo? So
That's right.
but now he looks like frickin' Mario. So I don't know what to call him.
It's me.
A Mario.
It's Mario.
Okay. Now I'm gonna install this deck ledger exactly how I would do that if it was a brand new house. So what I'm going to do, it's perfect that this has actually got 2 layers of building paper. I'm going to keep this first layer here, and it's tacked on pretty well. That way when I chalk my line doesn't actually get disturbed or change dimension. Now remember, I have an 1.5 inch deck board, then a 2x10, and I just got to figure out at what height to put my drip cap. So I have this drip cap here, but the best way to install these is have a drip cap at the bottom as well. So we need to figure out our dimension. I'm going to go 9 1/4 plus 1.5 inches is 10 3/4. I'm even going to go 10 7/8. Then I'm going to chalk my line to the top of my drip cap. What did I say? 10 7/8. So it's 7 7/8 is my chalk line. Show you what I mean. 7 7/8. Giovanni, you watching? Now, that's going to bugger me a little bit. There's some funky foam or something in here. That's okay. That's actually really... If I just butt my tape right up against the underside here, it works out really close for square. I'll double check. 7 7/8 is the top of my drip cap. Show you in a sec. That'll work out really good. So that mark there I'll go do the same thing on the other end and we'll chalk that line. So my drip cap is going to sit down here. My deck ledger's there, and then that allows 1.5 inches, maybe a little extra room so I'm not jarring this drip cap upward. And you'll see it when we actually get it installed, it'll make more sense. This corner is a lot easier. There's less happening, there's less buildup with paper, and so it's sitting a little more square. I'm just gonna hook the top of my square. My square is just touching the drip cap. Seven and 7/8. Gio, let's chalk this line.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. Not maliciously, but
No.
that's Tyler for you.
So you good there, Gio?
Hold tight, please.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good there.
I'm just gonna verify in a couple more spots, make sure we have our 7 7/8. So I have 7 7/8 there. Just quick, this is how I do my overlaps on my drip cap. Just doing a 2-inch one here. I had to borrow Geo snips, mine are at home, those little stubbies. Okay, whoa. Little Mario. Okay. So you gotta be a little mindful not to let it, like I'll just let me get my end going.
Yeah.
Did we crown up? Yeah.
Why did you drop this down, Cody?
Because my deck boards.
Right, right.
Right. It's like a little bop.
Okay. You just want it sitting down in that corner of that drip, but you also don't want it.
On the line?
Nope. That line does, that's from somebody else, little brother.
Oh.
Oh, fuck. Yeah, just hold that motherfucker in there.
What is your deodorant, man?
The best kind.
You smell like the bay.
So in my opinion, this is probably one of the best ways to install a deck ledger. I'm sure there's maybe better ways, but this is how I think it should be done on all conventional homes, ICF homes, it doesn't matter. And the whole premise behind this is just allowing water to exit. We have our bottom drip cap. We've just installed that. Luckily, the house already had this existing drip cap for the siding. You need a drip cap at every horizontal break. The most important part is having this drip at the bottom of your deck ledger, because you just got to think about how water runs. You want everything watershed. So we've installed the drip cap, and we were lucky we had a second layer of paper in behind. So we left that paper in behind to protect the rim joist of the house. We put our drip cap on. I'll tell you how to set the height here in a sec. Then we did some peel and stick, some Nova Flash over top, and then we've lapped that again. Because what happens, especially if you're in a climate with snow, and if you don't shovel your deck every 2 seconds, the snow builds up and it's a freeze-thaw cycle. So it'll thaw out, the water will melt, or the snow will melt, and if you don't shovel it away, it'll just wick in through your deck board, and if you have no building protection here, it'll just rot out the rim joist to your house. I think deck ledgers are vastly overlooked in all construction, so that's why we're making the video. On the back side of the ledger, we've done relief cuts every 8" on center, 3/16 of an inch deep. We've also laid out our screw locations so that we know that our screws going through the face don't go through that relief cut, because then that'll just allow water to get into your building. So you want to keep that in mind. With those relief cuts, then if water does and will get in behind, it has somewhere to exit. You're not trapping water in between your paper layer and your ledger. Drip cap allows that water to run back out, and it doesn't try to wick or capillary action back into the house. So those relief cuts also just cut that hydrostatic pressure where it would try to force it into the house, right? And just to prove people that math works every single time. All right, so we got sidetracked with the deck ledger. That's all done. Now it's time to start thinking about posts. We've dropped all our brackets in place. We didn't fasten them or anything. We don't need to, it'd be nice maybe for accuracy to have them pinned exactly. You know, if it was a commercial job or something, I'd probably epoxy these into place. But there's no risk of frost or anything pushing these out. So I don't need to like anchor them down. The pilings, I'll just make a note on that. They're 6 feet deep. I usually like to go like 7 or 8, but the guy, Andrew, just did it by hand. So 6 feet is lots. You want to be below frost. You also need rebar in these, because if you're in a frost zone and you don't use rebar, what's going to happen is the frost has so much force, it'll just snap the concrete in half, and then it'll just, the frost will heave it up and down. So you need rebar so that the area that is the deepest has no frost, and it's going to hold everything down. And it's going to stop the frost from popping that piling out. So you need rebar, and you need them deep. Now, we've got some 6x6s chosen. They're not the greatest. We sent Gio to the store to get some more. The brackets, obviously, we got to tweak a little bit. This one's off of my board. So what I need to figure out, remember how I said I have to notch one side of the post? Well, now I'm going to notch this side here. I'm just going to measure from the bracket to my 2x2, and it's 3/8 of an inch. So my post will sit here, and they'll actually, at the top of the bracket, overhang 3/8, so I'm in line with this. Now, the other thing you got to keep in mind is selecting your posts in the proper position so they look the best. So here, this is the post that we're going to use. This will be the bottom, so it's made just to tip straight up into place. This side's nice. It'll be the nicest when you're walking past in and out of that door of the house. This side is fairly rough. It's kind of ugly, but it's going to face the house. This will be the least visible. The opposite side of this looks nice. This one's a little bit rough, but there's not much you can do. They're all rough anyway. So having said that, this is going to face that way. So this is the part that I want to dado out. So I'm just going to spin this, and I'll show you how to figure out your 3/8. So I just need to get a height of that bracket. I'm going to go at least 3 1/8, maybe 3 1/4. Let's go 3 1/4. If you try to go exact, you'll have a space at the bottom. So 3 1/4. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a mark 3/8 down. And I'm going to set my saw blade to that. It's a little tricky, but you can do it. You just got to make sure your table of the saw is down flat on the material. Now this has a safety on it, so I don't have to worry as much. If it was a corded saw, I'd want to unplug it. And then I'll just lock it in. You want this tooth basically straight down, because it's back here, it's a different dimension. So yeah, that's 3/8. And then we're just gonna do a whole bunch of cuts. Now that that's notched, I want to make sure that it'll fit in the bracket. So it's 5 7/16. Yeah, I'm gonna go 5 7/16. So now from my original dado, I gotta take basically an 1/8 off. I'm gonna mark 5 7/16, and then I'll flip it over. It's kind of the crappy part, but at least it'll be fairly accurate. Oh my God, little Geo, where are you, buddy? How's that? Mama! This is how you do it by yourself, people. You can do it. Pretty close. This happens when you got the eye of the tiger. It's awesome. That's pretty nice in line, hey? It worked out really well. I don't want to rely on these temporary braces. It's just there because I'm by myself. They're super handy though, regardless. I'll get a brace on here just so I feel a little more secure. We're gonna do this post on the corner of the house. We're having a hard time selecting them, so we've selected our next best post is this position. I'm just a squeak. I'm a 1/16 off my line plus my 1/8 inch material for the bracket. 3/16 of an inch notch on here. And then again, 5 7/16 to fit the bracket. Now, if we selected this one, it's in the right position. So when we stand this one up, that'll be the outside. This is the bottom. That's the way we've chosen it. So again, I'll go, so this one is 3/16. And then from there is 5 7/16. Actually, that's perfect. I'm just gonna go 3/16 inch each side and we'll be good to go. My other post is cut, ready to go in. I got my sawhorse on the right side. That way I'm gonna have it on this side, so when I stand this next post, my 2x4 is not in the way. I'm just gonna set a nail so I could just drop that 2x4 on there later. Just make it easy. And just a little bit of prep work will go a long way. It'll speed it up, and it's not like, oh man, I need to brace this, and you're running around trying to get everything organized. So we finally found some good posts. They're 10 footers, but they'll still work in height. The next step, I've got my 2 main posts braced. We'll get into the details later. But now I have my next post, this middle one, ready to go in. But before I do that, I want to measure from the outside of this post. Now I got to make sure not to measure off of the notch that I cut. I'm going to go from the end of my post, which what is also the end of my 2x4 up above. Now I've notched this in a way that my post is going to be flush on this side of the bracket. 93 inches, maybe 93 and a 16th. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark that up top, and that way it's less goofing around when I stand this post. Plus I had to send Gio on another job. The guys needed help. So I got to kind of do this by myself and maybe a little bit of help from Trav here. And what's nice about this, these two posts, they're plumb, but they're not perfect. But it doesn't, because this board is at 180 and a half. So even if they're all sitting like this, and I lay out that 93 and a 16th, they're all laid out at the same rate. I don't want them too out of plumb, or it'll just be, it might screw it up too much, but they're within like an eighth or a quarter. So I'll do my layout, and then later when I go to fine tune everything, if I push my brace, they all line up perfectly plumb with each other. So I'm gonna go from the outside of my post. .93 and a 16th. I'll just have to transfer that with the old square Rooney here. Post there. Easy peasy. Whoa, even smarter. Preset a screw or two. And what's nice is I have the mark on the underside, so I don't have to see my line there. I can line it up with that mark right on the bottom corner. Gonna get a little tricky. Let's turn into a lumberjack. But at least if I set the top, it's safe. It's not going anywhere. Now down here, hopefully our chalk line's still there. Yep. The reason I offset it to this side is because we're offset that 7/16 or half an inch from our bracket, because my original line is over here. So we just offset it to one side. Worked out good. Yeah, we're just gonna keep going with the posts. I think you got a pretty good handle on that and how it all works. And we'll show you how it's all braced up when we're done, and then just how it all ties together, and it'll keep everything nice and plumb with the minimal amount of braces, so you're not tripping over the flipping things. I want to show this just because it is super important. We have all our chalk lines, so it's easy to do our layouts. This bracket's bang on the mark that we want, and it's 133 inches long. I'm going to cut it 2 by twice at 133. You like that phrase? I got that from Andrew, the owner here. It's hilarious. I got myself a little 2 by twice here. So this 2 by 4 will be 133. Just write that down inside the bracket. And then over here, I can figure this one out too. So I'll just basically lay it out from chalk line to line, and then I can pre-mark my 2 by 4. And then once I put it up, I can easily stand these posts with basically by myself if you have to. So I just want to make sure I'm hooked properly and in the right position. Well, 63 1/8. 63 1/8, X on the right, 133 total. As you can see, from the time lapse, we put the outer post first, then the middle post, and that just allows me to do my quick layout, and then it's easier for me to just get it into position. Now we have the second row, but I don't have a post here to line up with. But that shouldn't matter because my overall deck length is still the same. So it's the same length of board as that one, 133, with this post being 63 1/8, blah, 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 like we did before. But now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna, when I have time, I'm gonna butt this into this 2x4 because it's flush with the outside of my posts. So it's a perfect way of doing it. I don't have to line up on a post. The only thing I'm gonna do now is, I gotta do it right here, is I'm just gonna go from outside a post to here. I don't have to be perfect, but I'm gonna say 60 7/8. That's where I want my 2x4 to go. 60 7/8. So this will be post. This is where my 2x4 will go. I'll put a block of wood under here so that when I set it up, it doesn't fall constantly. And that's just a little trick. We have all the posts up. We used all the same theories because we had stationary posts and stationary dimensions at the bottom of the posts. Whenever we put our horizontal bracing up, we just made it whatever the dimension was from outside a post to outside a post. And then we just attach those braces at the top. But I want to explain to you how all the braces work so it makes sense in your mind. So this 45 controls this post and that post in this dimension, this direction, because it's tied together with this chunk of wood. This angle, this 45 brace, controls the 3 posts at the back because we have this horizontal attaching all 3. So that one will control those this way, right? Then I'll get to this tricky one later. This is a test. This one is actually kind of cool because it's not typical on the outside of the framework, but that 45 will control these 3 posts in this dimension. Okay, and then because we have this horizontal, we have this post tied to this one, tied to this one, tied to a 45 that way. Then we have this 45 that connects these 2 outer posts. So they're all tied together. And then the only other direction that we have that's a little bit goofy is these 2 aren't directly tied to a brace in this dimension. But remember, we have this guy here that's attached to this post, and then this brace is attached to the 2x4 horizontal at the back, which then they're all, I don't know if you call it, they're still directly connected to each other. They're just offset. So that's our test, is I'm gonna plumb this one, and then I'll see how plumb these are. They should be, because all my base dimensions are the same. And it's gonna be very close, I predict, but we're gonna just do that, see how close we are. If you want to be super particular, you would run like a create an L tie out of this so that this 2x4 had more strength so it wasn't playing back and forth. But I'm not overly concerned about that because once I start tying in the top of the pergola, I can still manipulate things after. So we got to get everything nice and plumb. We're going to check all of our stuff. And then, because we don't want to skip that step, then it's on to building the deck. And then once we get the deck framework done, we'll jump up on the pergola. So I changed my mind. Once we get all these posts nice and plumb, I'm actually going to install the beam work for the top joists for the pergola. That way the beams are all in place. And then later we can do the joisting in, because I'm just worried about having access with my ladder to be able to get up to that height. Because once the deck platform's in, then I got to work like on top of the deck and down on the ground, up on the deck, down on the ground. Okay. But I'm also at some point going to show you a trick on how to get these 45 braces out of the way of when you actually do your joisting. It still be super solid. It just gets it gets these diagonal braces out of the joist space. So I'll show you that too. The brace directly behind me, it did work really well. As we adjusted this post, the other two translated and they're all perfect. Now, this is my trick on how to get the bracing out of the way of your joist space, is we're just gonna put a 45 and nail it true, and then it'll never change. So we can't adjust it like we can with the turnbuckles, but now that everything's plumb, we shouldn't need to. I just need, because I'm working by myself, you just got to learn to think ahead. So definitely going to set 2 screws in each location. Now that this one is anchored, I can't change this at all, which is nice. I can get rid of this one with the turnbuckle and it's out of my way. And that's all I'm gonna do for now. The ones that go to the outside of the deck, they won't be in the way at all. And then this one, if you just back up, the one that's right here in front of you, probably what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna, once I get my beams in, I'm just gonna screw this to the post, and I'm just gonna cut that off and disconnect my turnbuckle, and then that one's set as well. So I'm gonna do that later. But there's my trick. Now we're gonna figure out the height that we want for our beams, and we'll just keep rolling. Now to set the height of our beams, we don't have that exactly determined. I'm here up on the ladder. I just wanna look around and see which posts are the lowest. And it's pretty much the one to your right. So this one right here is the lowest, tied with the other one on the opposite side of the corner. But so I'll show you where we're gonna start. And then basically, I really wish that I could just cheat and use my laser level, but I wanna show you guys how to level this in manually so you can do it with just basic hand tools. So you don't need a $1,500 laser level, okay? Unless you wanna rent one. But yeah, we're gonna do it old school. Yeah, so it's probably hard to see in the video. This post is either the lowest or the one behind me. So we're gonna just level in each direction, see if they'll work. And if they do, then we'll just take and continue that height all the way around. Now Andrew and I, we kind of figured about 3 inch, so the beam's gonna sit here, and then the joists are gonna run this way, and we want them just to ride over top of this roof a little bit. We want water to be able to run from underneath into the eaves trough. I think he's actually putting like a polycarbonate or some sort of vinyl corrugated material on top. Anyhow, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go, like, let's say 3 inches above the eaves trough is here. It's kind of hard for me because I want to illustrate to you, but I can go over top of the roof like an easy foot. So it just gives me a rough idea. I think 3 inches is really nice. So we're just gonna go with 3 inches. I'm gonna mark it lightly. No one will ever see it. And we just pick a height. I'm just gonna square that around. Then, because little helper Geo isn't here, I'm gonna set my level on the nail. Now make sure your nail is relatively level. You could probably already tell that if we would have had the joists in on the deck, then we'd have to have it fully decked in order to be able to do this. And I think this is actually easier. Now the tricky part is being able to see the bubble. I am cheating a little bit because I do have my 6 foot level, 6 to 10 foot level. So I want to be as accurate as possible when I'm using this level so I don't end up and down all over the place. So I can tell right away we have roughly 2.5, 3 inches exposed. I know my height is good. I'm going to just continue this all the way around. So now I'm just going to square that mark up. I'm going to set a nail there. Then I'm just going to keep leveling, level all the way around. See, this is where I get to cheat, using my 6 to 10 foot Stabila level because they're magic. I don't have any straight lumber left over. I use it all for our bracing, but if you had a straight 2x4, you could do the exact same setup and then just use probably a 4 foot level. Most people should have one of those. You could even use a 2 foot level if you really had to. So there is alternatives than having one of these. See, this way is easier, but you just don't always get the perfect situation. Oh, that was cool.
That was cool.
Just, ah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have the first ply of our beams on. So I just did 1 ply on each set of posts. Doink, doink, doink. Then when we go to land our joists, now I did mention earlier that I think the homeowner is going to put like some sort of clear material on the roof. So on our joists that are going to run this direction, we're actually going to taper cut them and give the slope, because he wants it to be a modern pergola. He doesn't want it to have slopes and all that. So we're going to do that. So at this stage, I think I need to get the joists in because the homeowner wants to put the decking on in the weekend. And then we could come back and do the joists. And then after the joists are on, I'll put the last ply on each beam. And that way I don't have discrepancies in height. Everything will be nice and set. I'll just push up the last layer, and then I don't have to think or try to get it perfect. It'll just be perfect because it's already in place. So with that, we're happy with where we're at now, and then we're just going to roll on to joists. Now that we're ready for beams and joists, I'm going to show you how we're going to do it. I didn't actually know until basically a few minutes ago. I had a few theories, and it's just the mixture of, do I do a drop beam here or a flush beam? and we're going to do a mixture of both. I'll show you how we're going to do that. I'll also show you on our super fancy smart board, white board. It's pretty digital. Basically, the joists, we're not going to put a beam on this set of posts. We're going to put a beam on this set on the inside, and it'll be a dropped beam. I'll show you in the diagram, but the joists will run through and then they'll just sit on top of the beam. So there'll be a drop beam all the way through here, and then over here, I think I'm going to do a flush beam, and I'm going to do a flush beam here. Then my joists can run into it, and then because I'm building a 3-inch extra lip all the way around the perimeter, I can just add a block of wood on the outside of the post and then a perimeter, and this base, I'll have lots of backing for my deck boards, and I think it'll work out pretty good. So let's show you on the diagram. All right, so here's just the edge of the house. Here's our deck ledger and then the posts. So essentially, we're just gonna have this joist. Yeah, it's a little confusing because it's not 3D. I'm gonna just end that there. So inside here, I'm gonna have a 2-ply flush beam. And then these joists are gonna have a hanger and hang off of here. Then over here, we're gonna do a 2-ply dropped beam, just like that. And we don't need a beam here because we have like less than 8 feet this way. So, and with 2x10s, we have lots of support. There'll be a lot more detail that I can't articulate right now. So that it just gives you just a really rough idea of how we're gonna do that. Now we gotta figure out level, and we're just gonna wing it and figure it out as we go. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna base everything off the top side of my ledger board here. I took the little rubber stopper off my level so I get a nice sharp edge on there. So that's the top of my joists. And then after I have those all marked out, then it's just a matter of doing some simple math just to get the beam heights. This is just the trickiest part. I do want to show you one thing after I get this post laid out. Is I think my method of how I'm going to do my next step is going to be fairly accurate, or more accurate than leveling every single post. And if anything, just be on the downward slope. If you're not sure which direction to go, always make sure you're just a little bit sloping down if you're not sure. Okay, I'm going to just square those up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the exact same thing on the far end, and then I'll just chalk a line to figure out what the middle posts are for level. And don't forget, don't mark the wrong side of the level either, because I've done that before and mess you up in a quick hurry. And like I've said before in other videos, there's always more than one way to do things. And if you have a way that you think is better and gets you the same results, just do it. You don't gotta tell me that you got a better way, because there's lots of ways to do things. Yeah, so when I square those up, then I can chalk a line from one end to the other here, the other row, and then after that I'll figure out the best way to level this back corner post. The other thing that's nice about squaring all the way around, because we need backing for all our deck boards, having the marks on all 4 sides of every post is probably not a bad idea. I was almost going to say I need a help chalk line in this, but fancy invention called a nail. Now over a long span, you got to pull it pretty tight because it could sag in the middle, because just because if it's a string doesn't mean gravity won't affect it, or especially wind. Now I'll just level from this post to that post, and we're all laid out. So yeah, that was pretty actually easier than I thought it was going to be. I'm just verifying that these are plumb. Then I'm going to set my screws into this diagonal, and then I'm going to take the bottom half of my turnbuckle off and cut this off. This side, I've already verified these are plumb. All three are plumb. I've tagged this on. Now I can get rid of that diagonal brace, and now everything's out of the way of my deck boards and all my joists, and it just makes it that much easier to put this thing together. I got a little ahead of myself here. First thing I did is I put these blocks on, and I just went 9-inch blocks, and I made little marks at 1.5 inch points just so that it would overhang 1.5 inches, because remember I want a 3-inch beyond all my posts. So I did that one, I did this one, I did that one, and I did basically all the perimeter ones. Then, which actually allowed me to not have to calculate where my drop beam went, then we literally just lifted the dropped beam into position. We just held it up tight to the bottom of the block, screwed our beam to the post, added our second ply. So our beam is set now. So you just can't forget to screw your first ply into your post. And we still need to screw off the second ply. And then over here, we have the blocks again. Lost my drill. And then I'm gonna just start to put on the perimeter. Once the perimeter's on, then the joists will just be done. So just trying to visualize how this stairwell is gonna look. I think I'm just gonna run a joist all the way through to the very end, but I wanna put a block here first, and then when this joist comes through, this face is my finished edge. I'm super happy that we went around and marked all the square marks on all the posts, because now I can just set these blocks nice and deadly to the lines. Not the lions, the lines. And sometimes you say, man, I should have pre-started that screw, but that's okay. And you can tell our beam height and our line height is deadly, so that's good. So I'm going to put a little block right there, and then we'll lay out that joist. I guess I'll show you how to lay out the joist right now. Now you have to keep in mind, now that we have multiple plies going on, don't get confused. But I'll show you. I got a hook here on the inside of my rim joist. And I'm going to measure to my block, which is 55 1/16 to here. And then I want my joist on the left side of my mark. So 55 1/16, X on the left. So right here, I just butted into my rim ply, same idea. 55 1/16, X on the left. Now I had a previous mark there, but I didn't add my extra 1.5 inches. So that's just me thinking and working things through in my mind. And if you really don't want to get confused, do 1.5 inches. We're gonna scratch that one out too. Then you know, X, X, X. So that's where my joist goes. We did skip landing the rest of the joists. I believe we had the whole perimeter structure for the joists set, which was the hardest part. Then we just had to infill with the joist, which is fairly easy. I did want to show you one thing. We had, because we have that 3-inch space all the way around, The other thing I did is, this is a 2-ply beam right here. So I have this ply that just butts into the post, this ply overlaps, nails into that post, and then we hang all our joists off of it. And then here we just have backing between this and our outer rim, and that's just to allow, because we picture frame this deck. So when you picture frame, you basically, exactly as it says, you picture frame the deck, and then all your boards just fit in between that. So you need lots of backing, so you can see it's just solid everywhere. So that's, Andrew did that himself. The layout was pretty easy. I just found my one long joist that ran through, the longest one, and I just pulled my 16-inch centers, and actually worked out perfect. I didn't hit any posts. I missed every post. Yeah, I can just show you that quick. Like really, from edge to edge. So if I pull from this edge, it's just 16, 32, 48. So left edge to left edge to left edge is all 16s, which is still center to center to center to center. Yeah, so I think other than that, we went through all the hardest things, and then now the customer will infill the rest of the deck boards, and you know, we did all the hard work, so our job is done. We have a good start to the joists. Andrew wants to do some deck boards this weekend. I want to be able to get some of this bracing out of the way. So if I can get a layout and at least even a few of the top pergola boards in, then I can strip some of the lower bracing and just give them more room to work. The hardest part about that is just figuring out the layouts and everything like that, which we'll get into right now. So this is the top view looking down upon the deck. So these are our posts. And these are just the one side of the beams for now, how we have it built. In my freestanding pergola video, I talk about having equal spacings for all the joists. I want to do that again today. It's a little bit different math, but I'm just going to figure it out as we go. But essentially how we want this to look is, I'm thinking I'll have a joist like so, equal spacing. I don't know how many yet. I'm going to have some overhang back here. Andrew actually wants one overhanging this way, but we can do that by installing this back rim joist or whatever you want to call it. Same thing out here. The hardest part is getting the equal spacing, but also having this top rafter line up relatively. Let's say this is 2 inches off the edge of our beam, and this one's 2 inches off the edge of our beam. We got to figure out how to do that. The overall layout isn't that complex. It's just figuring out how do we space it so that we got to kind of manipulate it so that we're not a foot off over here and 1 inch over here. So that's what we're going to figure out. I'll basically, like I said, I'm going through this as we go. I'm thinking about it, trying to figure it out as you're watching. So this beam itself is 192.5, and then this beam is 137.5, which leaves us 55 inches from the edge of this beam to here. So I made a storyboard, and I'll show you what that looks like. The storyboard is basically the 192.5. I just had to splice 2 8-foots together, so that's why it's doubled up right here. Biggest thing I want to do is mark the end of that short beam. So I'm going to do a big old fat 55-inch mark here. I'm going to do a hefty mark because I know that dimension isn't going to change. And then now into the math is like, how the heck do we figure this out? Maybe we'll just base it on 16s roughly. So I'm just going to hold this tape. Right away, 16s don't work. If I'm off, let's say I want to try to spread it over 55, 56 even. Yeah, let's get into some math. It's the only way I can do it. I just got to figure it out, do some math on the whiteboard. Good thing you didn't watch that. You would have been bored out of your mind. I'm using the spindle math. I have a video specifically on just how to determine equal spacings. And so you can just, there's a link for it right now. You can watch that. That'll give you a little more insight. It's a little more thorough. I am going to run through it right now really quick, how it works. And this is, it'll explain how I came up with my math. We basically did 3 scenarios with 3 different spacings. So we have one scenario here, 14 units at 13.5 inches each equals 189. But I'll explain why it's 190.5 outside to outside. And then I did another scenario, 13 units at 14.5 inches per unit equals 188.5, which is 190 total. I'll explain that too. And then another scenario, 12 units at 15.5 equals 186, which is 187 overall, and 2.5 inch space off the start. So I'll explain that. So how the spindle math works, or the equal spacing, is you take, typically how I look at it is my first joist and this joist are, let's say, a newel post for a spindle. And then we're trying to figure out an equal spacing for our spindles in between those posts. So what we'll have is we'll have a space plus our spindle. In this case, it's a joist. And then, so this would be one space or one unit. The next unit is a space plus a joist. So that's 2 units. So when you calculate your math, you can't get confused. You have to know how to work the numbers. So when you're calculating this very last one, so this will be a space in this last spindle. And then typically what happens is you have a space, but because this is a newel post, you have to add the width of your spindle to this dimension so that you can have an equal amount of units. And a unit is a space and a spindle. So we're going to add 1.5 inches to this dimension to get our last and final unit. Okay? So I'm going to run through the scenario that works for us. Then we'll confirm it on our storyboard. And then you know that it actually works. The other 2 don't work out because, remember, we're trying to get this here joist or rafter a decent dimension off of the beam, not too far and not too shallow. Let's run through it. Okay. So we have 13 units at 14.5 equals 188.5. Now it's not really confusing because we're all using 1.5 inch material. So 13 units, so we start with a space in our spindle. So our dimension starts here, but because we have to add the width of our spindle or our joist to this dimension, this 188.5 is from here to here. But overall, so from outside to outside, which is easier on my little brain, is 190. Okay? Then we know our overall is 192.5, so we have 2.5 inches of leftover space, and we divide that by 2, so we get 1.25 inch here before our layout starts, and then we have a 1.25 inch layout at the end. And we can verify this on our storyboard so that we don't start making a whole bunch of marks on our material, because it's all going to be exposed. And then we're going to confirm if it works out okay for our notch or our L-shaped piece. So I'm just going to write, because my math and my brain don't work too good, I just go on my calculator, I go 14.5 plus 14.5 equals, and then you just keep hitting equals. So it's 14.5, 29, 43.5, and 58. Now we can't get confused by that, because remember, These numbers start from here. Our spacings start from the inside of this joist. So we're going to lay out our 1.25 inches. Then we're going to lay out our first rafter. Then we're going to go these numbers. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I have my 1.25 inches plus my first rafter. So that's that there. Then I start from the inside. Now because I don't have a helper, I'll just do it by myself. $14.5. Now you always have to keep in mind space plus the spindle, so the spindle's over here. So I'm just going to go minus 1.5 inches, just so that I'm. Then it's 29. So 29 joist on the left. 43.5. Right, 43.5 joist on the left. And then the last one is 58. 58 joist to the left. And then this mark, so yeah, you can do that, Trav. So you can see here, space plus my joist is 14.5. I'll have 13 inches in between every single one. And then remember, this is the beam, our shorter beam. So we're actually going to have a 4.25 inch offset there, which I think is perfectly fine. I'll maybe, if you want, I'll run through another scenario really quick and show you why the other ones don't work. Let's verify this scenario here. So the 12 units at 15.5 inches each. We have a 2.5 inch start plus our first rafter. So let's lay that out. And normally if I'm doing a storyboard for other situations, I'll just mark them really light on one edge. And then that way I can kind of go back and forth. So 2.5. So I have a 2.5 inch space and then my first joist, which takes me to 4. So I'm just marking it on this one edge. Then I start my 15.5 joist on the left. Then good thing I wrote those numbers down. 31 joist on the left. 46.5. And then the final one is 62. 62 joist on the left. So you can see now it's really light, but there's the inside of the joist. So from my beam, it's like 9 3/4. So that spacing doesn't work. And then the other scenario where I have 14 units at 13.5, I end up too short. And my rafter is like close to the beam, but not on it. So then again, it doesn't, the neck spacing's too far over. Now that we have it laid out, I can go and I can do that same layout on that beam. I can do it on this beam, and then I can actually work it backwards as long as I don't get confused. Do all my layouts on my beams, and then I can just start cutting my rafters. So I just need to determine how much the customer or Andrew wants the rafters to overhang the beams this dimension. Once I determine that, then I'm going to cut a 2 inch slope in the top of all my joists or my rafters. and that way the pergola itself looks modern and level and square. And then we're just going to cut each rafter with an angle, and that'll give us our slope after he puts that plastic or whatever the vinyl roofing on. So there's one thing to keep in mind, and I'll show you later, is when you're cutting slopes, you always have to have your overall dimension cut first, and then you do your slope. Because you have different length of materials and you try to cut the same, let's 2-inch slope, you're gonna have a different angle. And when we get to these shorter rafters, I'll show you how to keep the same angle, but our drop will be different because our run is different. So just something to keep in mind. I'm gonna keep plugging away here. Yeah, we're running out of time. I think it's pretty easy, and I'll show you after I get her done. Couple things with the storyboard. I finished my layout to the very end. So I just made all my marks, my 14.5, and I made it right to the very end. I want to verify that my math is correct. The storyboard helped me do that. I have the same ending space, that 1.25 inches. So I have the same space at the end as I did at the beginning. So I know my math is correct. So that was good. The other thing that the storyboard came handy on is, so the other day I literally had to send cameraman away to do some stuff. Gio wasn't here. So I ended up just doing a lot of this myself. And the goal was to get enough of a framework up that I could get the bracing down so the customer could actually do some deck boards on the weekend. So I worked a fair bit on that, and I'll show you how the storyboard worked out way better than I thought. It's so handy, it's incredible. So first thing that I did is I was trying to think about, okay, it's too hard to measure or remember all the numbers that associate with the 14.5-inch layout. So all I did is I took the storyboard and I literally just plopped it on top of my 6x6 posts. I flushed up the ends because it's the exact same length as my beam. Then I just did my layout on there. I moved it to the center set, did the same thing, moved it to the third beam, and I flushed it on the far end, copied the layout, boom. I didn't have to measure, I didn't have to calculate a whole bunch of times or move my tape a million times. The storyboard was already did it for me. So after that, then I cut some rafters, pre-cut those, I got them up. I figured that my rafters, my long ones, are gonna be 155 inches long. So we know that a 2x10 is 9.25, roughly, give or take, at the far end. I wanted a 2.25-inch slope. So when I measure this, is I just hook my tape here and I measure up 7, and then I just chalk a line. One thing to keep in mind is when you're chalking it out, you always want your crown up. So I crowned them all up, I chalked my line, I cut them. The crown, I used straight material so that it didn't become skewed, because if it's super crowned and you chalk a line, the top side's straight and the bottom side's not. So I just picked super straight lumber. So that's over. So what you do is you cut your 155-inch length first, then you mark your 7-inch, then you chalk your line, and then you rip it. Now, your cut side's always to the top because all our beams are set level. So if we set our square, this corner square and this corner square, which then this is plumb and this is plumb. You could flip it over and still have the same slope, but then your cuts aren't square on the ends, so it'll bugger you up. Then the next thing is on this short side, so I'm looking at the side of the deck. Here's a post, here's a post, and this is the other one out here. To figure out my short span, I knew it was 72 inches from the outside of a beam to the outside of the beam. I needed a 4.5-inch overhang here, and then later I'll add the rim joist. And here is a 14.5-inch overhang from here to here, and then later I'll add the rim joist there. So all I did is I took 4.5-inch plus 72 plus 14.5, and I got 91 inches. So what I did is once I had one of these 155s cut and tapered, then I just pulled my 91-inch dimension and I made just a really light square mark, and I just made a point there, and then I measured the height on this rafter that was already cut, so I figure out I have the same pitch, so I could determine what my beginning height was. So that's 7 and 15/16. So on all these shorter rafters that are 91, that's my beginning height. So you just got to keep those things in mind, because if you started with a 7, you'd actually be down here and you'd have a steeper pitch and it'd bugger up your roof material. So I'm going to show you quick how to use the storyboard to figure out the rim joist length. So we're going to use this scenario here. I'm going to count the amount of rafters, and then I'm going to have one overhang this way and one overhang this way. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I have 10 of them. So I'll have 12 total. I'll show you that. I'm also just going to get a rough idea of length just so I don't screw up my boards. It'll be roughly 131 plus two extra spaces. I've hooked it on the very end here. I'm going to have my last rafter. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 10, remember I said 10 was roughly 131, so I was right. 11, 12. So overall, I'm going to cut it at 161, and then I'll show you how the rest goes. So that's how you figure it out. That way you're not climbing up the ladder a million times, trying to guesstimate. If your rafter tails are kind of changing directions or going all over the place, you don't have to try to accommodate that. If I go by my layout on my storyboard, then I know the dimension is true. So this end's nice and square. I know the other end is garbage, so I want to cut it off. I'm going to go 161. Now when you're squaring and there's knots in the road, don't ever square off the side with a big knot, because the knot usually bulges out and it'll throw your square off. And I wouldn't square like this because I have this knot here. So I just automatically switch my square to a nice straight side with no knots. So I'll cut that and then I'll show you how to lay it out on the storyboard. So I want the good side out, crown up, which is going to be like this. I'm just going to write up on the top side. No one will see it. Up. So I want all my square marks to be on this back side. So all I did is I just lined up the outside of this mark with my new cut board. The other end ends up flush as well. You'll see that. And then all I do, like this is obvious, this is 1.5 inches. So I just mark all my marks. My storyboard, I don't have to calculate 14.5 plus 14.5 plus 14.5 plus 14.5. And then I don't get confused, oh, which side do I mark on? Do I mark on the left or the right? So I just do that. I've done it all the rest of the way. You can see when you get to the end that it's flush with this one. I'll just mark this so I don't have to measure the 1.5 inches. ends there. I square those up, and then I just pluck this rim joist on. We're gonna be overhanging one rafty styles. Okay, happy? Okay, you don't, yeah, just, we'll square them up later as long as the bottoms are flush. I'm gonna pull it your way. Okay, go down a little bit, Gio. Okay, whoa.
You want me to pull on it a little bit?
My way. Oh, back your way, sorry. Okay, go for it.
It's hanging down a little bit.
You're gonna have to reef it up as high. That concludes the deck and pergola video. Thanks for tuning in and thanks for watching. This one was a little bit of a challenge for me because I was busy working. We had a couple jobs on the go. I had to send cameraman Trav away. I had to send Gio away. And it just took some extra clipping. We had filmed quite a bit more to the project than what was displayed, but a lot of it just didn't make sense because of the order of the shooting just wasn't a clear representation, and it may have confused you guys more than what the video is right now. So we took actually a fair bit of time making the edit so it was relatively clear. One thing I wanted to point out is if you notice the top side of the deck, it's nice and square. So the perimeter is a full height 2x10, but all the interior rafters are sloped. And that just maintains that modern pergola look from the outside, but gives it that slope and the drainage function on the interior and allows the water to drain. And one thing that we actually forgot, me and the owner, Andrew, if we would have flipped all those rafters 180, we could have actually just dumped it right onto his roof and down into his eaves trough. So there's just a little glitch there for you too, a little hindsight thing. Anyway, I think the big things, having the dimensions on the ground, being able to just transfer all our dimensions from the chalk lines on the pilings. We just moved those up. Nothing changed. We basically used the storyboard was huge as well. And the storyboard is a byproduct of the fact that we did a good clear layout on all our pilings. So I think fundamentally this video will give you guys a lot of good value. And just let me know if there's things that you need or if there's missing information that you want, and I can just shoot a video and post it. So yeah, just like and comment, and we'll be in touch, and thanks for tuning in.
Yep.
Okay. We got all the rafters for the pergola done. All the beams are done. We'll show you that at the very end.
Order a mic tonight.
Mike and Tykes. Mike and Ikes.
Mike and Ike's.
Are we good?
Yep.
Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Kody with Up To Kode. Today I'm going to show you how to build this deck and pergola all at one shot. Does that make sense? All in one shot. Okay, let's shoot one more. Good.
Yep.
Hey everyone, I'm Kody with Up To Kode. Today I'm going to show you how to build this deck and pergola and all the information you need to do it properly and do it yourself.
It's different because this one, if you're done with it, you only like swing. You only get like a side to side swing option, up and down, or staying right. Whereas the other cameras is the opposite. You have more horizontal stability.
So take a look at the finished product. I hope that video helps you guys. I think it's pretty well rounded. I think you can do it yourself now. Follow lots of my tips and tricks. Don't forget that I have a video on the freestanding pergola, and I also have a deck video that's just a simple rectangular deck if that's all you want to do. So lots of information on the channel.
Sweet.